This is DBrief, your monthly briefing on the developments in industry policy in Australia and the impacts of digitalisation, decarbonisation and diversification on business and industry. Here is James Scotland with the Head of Industry Development and Policy for the Australian Industry Group, Louise.
We're back for another month, Louise, and I feel like I should say Selamat Pagi or something equally Indonesian to welcome you back. How was your trip to Indonesia?
Yeah, bike. It was good, thanks.
Show up.
So I sit on the Advisory Council for ACISIS, which is the Australian Consortium for In-Country Indonesian Studies. And it's a consortium of universities who send Australian students to Indonesia to study, mostly under the New Colombo Plan, which is a DFAT program to get Australian students into Asia, but not only. And we meet for our sort of AGM once a year in Indonesia, usually in Yogyakarta, which is a lovely university town, but this year was in Jakarta.
Oh, I thought you went to Yogyakarta. Oh, well, what a shame. What a shame.
I know. I much prefer Yogyakarta. Yeah.
And what did you achieve this year at the AGM?
So it's good. It's always, good to sort of reconnect and make sure we're on track, understand, there's a review of the New Colombo Plan at the moment. So make sure, we're still meeting the government's objectives and, working out what that might change, making sure our programs are right. It's really interesting. The legal studies program is going gangbusters. It's oversubscribed. It's fantastic. The journalism program is really struggling. So making sure that the subjects fit for the modern relationship between Australia and Indonesia. It was also good to just have a chat to people on the ground about the new Indonesian government. We talked earlier this year about the election. So they've got now the biggest cabinet they've ever had. There's about 100.
Holy dolly, really? What are their names?
Don't test me. About 30 are from the previous government or have served as ministers before. So there is a bit of continuity, continuity and change always. The president's first trip was to China and the second trip was to the US. And I think that speaks to how Indonesia is going to try to play. I mean, everyone in Asia looks to Singapore and says, can we be like them on a number of fronts? But the way Singapore manages to navigate East and West is, greatly admired by everyone, both in the East and the West. And I think Indonesia wants to really step up as a power player and also bridge that divide.
Yeah, I can understand that. The Indonesian equation is much more complex than Singaporean. It's an archipelago. It's a polyglot of religions. They've got every religion known to man. I think in strong presence there. Bali's Christian, others are Muslim.
Bali's Hindu, and most of the rest of the country is Muslim. But I think there are more Christians in Indonesia than there are. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't say Australia. I mean, there's a lot of people, but yeah, you're right. There's big populations,
and a lot of it is local based anyway. It's based around the island because it is a archipelago. Not easy for Indonesia to straddle that when it's hard to pull it together as a united front anyway.
That's right, but I think after independence that they're doing well. More importantly, is their role in global supply chains. So. China's invested quite heavily in their lithium mines, which is what's affecting the Australian lithium price. Remember during the last Trump-China-US trade war, some stats coming around about Indonesian products being exported to the US still relied on, I think, on about 30% Chinese inputs. So really quite integrated, and any trade war, as with Australia, will negatively affect or positive. It will just affect.
It will affect.
Indonesia.
Yeah. What was your feeling? Did it feel like the new government is well accepted in Jakarta, which would be probably the place that would be most accepted?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of let's just wait and see.
Yeah, right. And I think that might be happening around the world.
I mean, I think, there was a former minister who was actually, I think, Commerce Minister during the Australia-Indonesian Free Trade Agreement talks, ISEPA. So Thomas I can never get his name right, Lombobo. I might need to correct that. Was arrested under corruption charges.
Ooh.
Someone explained to me it's not that he was more or less corrupt than anyone else, but he was doing a lot of criticising of the government, and so suddenly he was out of favour.
Yeah, corruption's okay, just don't criticise. No.
So
actually, there's a flippant comment, because I think corruption's a lot less in Indonesia now than it was back in the
it is.
bad old dictator days. It's quite a good economy to do business with now.
I think so too. But no one seemed to think, he's particularly corrupt. I thought that was what was interesting. Nor was anyone particularly alarmed
that
he was arrested. It's got no press whatsoever in Australia.
Yeah. Do you think our trading relationship will be good under the new government? If the new Indonesian government is moving between China and the US, is that going to cause us a problem?
No, I don't think so. I think they still need inputs from us and technology from us, and everyone needs investment. So, we've got some good companies out there. And, don't forget, remember we spoke a couple of months ago about the ASEAN strategy. So I caught up with the Austrade guys, and they run off their feet with delegation after delegation. So there's still a lot of activity between Australia and Indonesia.
Hundreds of years ago, I was in Indonesia a lot, and I met with the Austrade guys a lot, and they had a pretty good posting. Sounds like they're working hard these days.
Yeah. Yeah.
These students of which you speak, will they be helpful for businesses in the years ahead? Will they come to Australia and have connections in Indonesia, or will they be more likely to stay in Indonesia and just be helpful for Australian companies? How do you sort of see those students seeing their careers?
Well, some do, we've done a bit of work because it's coming up to 30 years now of Achisus in operation. And you can see some people, Indonesia is now their life. That's it. They come backwards and forwards. Other people, it's just part of the sort of the onion skin of their career and their life, and just opens their eyes to broader experiences. I think we spoke on the supply chain podcast. I studied Arabic. I studied in Jordan on a summer program with Deakin, and then I also studied as an independent student in Egypt, and both really formative for my experience. But I'm not living in either country, so
yeah. But you did learn a lot, and now you're in international trade, so I think it all makes sense.
That's it. Yeah.
You mentioned supply chains before with Indonesia and that important role they play in supply chain. Recently, someone with the beautiful title, the US Special Rapporteur, although my French is always really bad.
So UN Special.
UN, did I say US? Oh, my apologies. No, UN. Yeah, UN. US Special Rapporteur. I don't think the US would have a rapporteur, just saying. The UN Special Rapporteur released a report that seemed to initially sing Australia's praises for its work in making supply chains visible, and particularly in regards to modern-day slavery. But as I went deeper into it, it felt like they weren't quite as supportive as I thought they were. Can you talk to that for a minute? Because it was interesting.
Yeah, so the UN Special Rapporteur for Modern Slavery, goes to various countries and does a review of how we're addressing the UN guidelines on modern slavery and, what's happening on the ground. So he was here in Australia a couple of weeks ago, and you're right, he was very complimentary of Australia, particularly of our efforts, or the government's efforts, to improve transparency among businesses and their global supply chains, and the reporting regime on how we mitigate or address the risks of labour exploitation and abuse. So that's the Modern Slavery Act, which I think we've spoken about before, and I sit on the Attorney General's Modern Slavery Advisory Group. So, for those who aren't caught up with this, if you have a turnover of 100 million, you have to report annually on the steps you're taking to identify and address the risks around contemporary forms of slavery. both in your operations and in your supply chain. So, which means that even if you don't have a turnover 100 million, this is probably on your radar because your customers would have to comply, and they're asking you about what you're doing.
Yeah, the pressure will come down and say you need to start reporting to say that you do not have any engagement with modern day slavery, which, as we've discussed before, is not always easy to verify.
Yeah. So there's around 11,500 statements have been listed. So it's quite significant. And it has really lifted awareness on the risks with contemporary forms of slavery and, which is good. But, no one wants to be involved in enslaving people. And so lots of companies are taking steps to identify, prevent, mitigate, or account on how they address these risks. And the special rapporteur, was quite complimentary and all that. However, we should be surprised, but however, all this effort has not actually lifted the millions of people who are living in slavery around the world.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
How do we make the difference? Of course, it's not just going to be Australia; it's everyone. So one thing that the special rapporteur is suggesting or supportive of is the recommendation that if you are a business of over 100 million threshold, you must have a due diligence system with the imposition of a penalty if you're not compliant. So what does this due diligence system look like? Who knows? But I suspect it means more work for suppliers. And, it would be in line with the 10 principles of the UN Global Compact. However, it would mean that the threshold for reporting would really capture a lot of small, medium-sized businesses. And, would they have the capacity? What sort of work needs to go into that capacity building and due diligence? And could we simplify it? Because at the moment it's one, it looks the same for absolutely everyone. And can we find a simpler or more streamlined reporting requirement for smaller companies? But one thing that this is a really good example of the way regulatory burden is getting embedded into supply chains. And so big companies have to comply and everyone says, well, that's fine, only big companies have to do. But once you start saying, well, and your supply chain, small companies have the same burden as big companies, they just have less capacity. And they're not in control of the reporting regime, they're not in control of the timing, their customers are. We've spoken to ACCC, which is our anti-competitive regulatory body. It's impossible for companies to collaborate because they might be seen as colluding on how to do this in a simplified way, which means that they all do it separately, they all do it differently, and small companies who have one or two or more large customers will be filling out all sorts of different forms, same but different, and can't utilise that one report for other customers. And so that's where the burden comes from.
And what will happen, I would suggest, is that small businesses will seek forgiveness rather than approval, and they'll just tick the boxes saying, yes, we've done everything we could to make sure we weren't dealing. Yes. Send it back, and if they get caught, they'll say, oh, bugger, sorry, I didn't realise that.
Well, that is right, but the problem is the penalties with their customers, so they're not taking that risk. So they are actually engaging third-party auditors at the expense of the small business.
Yeah, right. So, and then you say, well, why bother with this client? I mean, it's just too hard. Yeah. Yeah. The other thing that was interesting, I talked on the other podcast, Supply Circles, with supply chain experts, obviously, and there's a scenario of I'm dealing with a company overseas that I discover is not paying fair wages or not acting fairly. So after trying to remediate the thing, I decided to move my business elsewhere. The people that are most affected by that are the underpaid workers who lose their job. So moving away is really difficult. Forcing the companies to do the right thing is difficult, and the people affected are the ones that we're trying to protect. It's a conundrum.
It is, but I mean, maintaining the slavery isn't really going to ever solve.
No. I'm not suggesting that. I'm suggesting there's an ethical question involved about: do we help them get a wage, or do we have to, try and get them a better wage? It's just
so companies. So do talk about that, and they say, well, we're so small, what can we do? But they just, keep chipping away, lifting conditions and looking for
bit
alternatives
by
where
bit.
they can.
Yeah. It does raise this question of regulatory burden. I know you've looked at it this year. It feels to me in the supply chain that the pendulum's swinging much more away from the carrot towards the stick. So you have to do this, you have to do this. And it goes in a cycle. Every now and then we go through this heavy regulatory burden and then we try and ease the regulatory burden. You've got a different view on that, haven't you? Because you sit in a unique position.
Yeah. So I think we have been talking to companies about it, and, governments have tried their best. And I think on the whole, where there are actually sort of regulatory impacts, they, try to streamline reporting. They try to make sure that you report once, tell once, and that's it. But what's creeping into regulation is this supply chain. And it's, as I said, in modern slavery, it's now in carbon reporting. It's really it's quite insidious, because if a government is doing a form or asking, for compliance, they can streamline it. They can make sure that, they can constantly work to improve it. They can, work with a tax system, for example, to see if there's data that's already being captured, to reduce the burden. But as I said, big companies can't do that. They can't collude on this sort of thing. So, they've got all these obligations. They've got lawyers in their ears saying, you've got to do this right. And they also sometimes the suppliers themselves. So we're talking to a big beef processor. They are both a big customer, so their customers, their suppliers need to comply, but they are also a supplier to supermarkets, so they have to comply. So it's goes both ways. One of the big complaints from companies in this supply chain thing, because they also talk, we've got some members to talk about orange tape, where it's related to safety, is platforms. So companies are trying to grapple with all this, the regulatory burden of having to capture the regulatory reporting. So they engage with platforms. It's unclear sometimes who's paying for the cost of this platform. Sometimes it's a supplier, sometimes it's a customer. What's happening to all the data. And the biggest complaint is when your customer decides to switch platforms, the admin burden, in addition to the regulatory burden, nothing is saved. You have to keep uploading certificates, find new passwords, You can imagine. So there's no choice in that. There's no communication.
And likewise, disruptive industries also cause a problem for creating regulations. I'm thinking sort of the obvious Airbnb, Uber, or whatever. They come in, they totally disrupt, and everyone says, hey, they're not subject to the same regulations. And then there's a heavy-handed attempt to regulate them, and that doesn't work. There's challenges wherever you look with this.
Yeah. Well, I think for me, one of the biggest challenges of the sort of the ESG regulation, so this is modern slavery, gender reporting, carbon reporting, is that you're never actually compliant. What people want to see is constant improvement. And so you can never rest. You can never just tick the box and say, all right, that's done, and move on. Constant improvement is required. Which I guess, as the world, perhaps that's what we want, but from a business point of view, it is quite onerous.
Do you think it'll become easier with AI and that sort of thing? Will technology make regulation more difficult or easier for businesses?
Well, you'd hope. But even within the AI regulation, that's a supply chain, because you're having to certify that your AI suppliers, your vendors, what training data they're using. Is it legitimate? Does it have the right privacy regard, all that kind of stuff? And talking to some companies who are big buyers of AI, they're already asking those questions of their suppliers. And I just think
it's complex.
It's the wrong time to be a supply chain person and leave, James.
I mean, the people I talk to say we have to deal with local councils working at our warehouses and our egress and whatever. Then we have to deal with state governments. Then we have to deal with federal governments. And then there's international regulations. And then on top of all of that, there is decarbonisation and the really big mega issues. It's complex and really difficult. Nice to know that you're across it. I think this idea of seeing it from a different point of view and trying to get an industry perspective of it is probably the starting point.
Well, I think so. We're working hard with ACCC because in this case, we really need big companies to work together. And at the moment, they're too scared to, and we haven't got any decent guidance from ACCC. And because, not just the topics we've already mentioned, but don't forget we've got waste, product stewardship. We need companies to work together because we can't have multiple schemes. We can't have multiple ways of recycling plastics. We need to know that, how many times has this piece of plastic been recycled, because, of course, the polymers break down and actually become more toxic and all sorts of stuff. So, Yeah,
but that's the point. The decarbonisation challenge is not just getting to net zero for your company and your supply chain, but it's also managing the waste, and it's managing your fuel and all sorts of different regulations all over the place. Standards are in there.
Yeah, so we're not going to do this without greater collaboration. And at the moment, the regulatory regime of anti-competitive behaviour and collusion don't really allow it.
Oh, well, how hard can it be to get greater collaboration across industries, governments, state, federal council? Shouldn't be that hard. We should take a break and then we come back. This is our last episode for the year, so let's do a quick recap of 2024.
The largest Australian workplace changes in over a decade
Underpaying workers could result in crippling fines.
There'll be new rules about when a casual employee has the right
employees will have the right to disconnect.
Workplace laws are changing. Pay attention or pay the price. Safeguard your business with Australian Industry Group. The legal experts at Australian Industry Group will help you navigate the new legislation and prepare your business for the changes. Become a member today at aigroup.com.au.
The big issue at the start of the year was this was the year of elections. And the big issue for next year is it's the Australian election next year. How about you riff on that for a few moments? What do you think happened this year, and how's that going to set us up for next year?
Yes, well, so of all the elections, I think that obviously UK, US, most significant when we think about AUKUS, and as we've already talked about, Indonesia and India. So it would be interesting how the world handles what we expect to be another Trump trade war. So we, see how all the different personalities handle that. And within Australia, if we do have any change, what difference that will make. So from the Australian point of view, we have to have the election by May. And there's a few things sort of in between. There's Easter, there's potentially an election in WA. So the timing, everyone's sort of speculating. No one knows exactly when it will be, but it'll be sometime between February and May. Parliament's scheduled to be back sitting in February, but, Parliament's closed for the year and in its last day passed something like 30-odd pieces of legislation. So it's a bit of a clearing the decks. And there's a few things that weren't passed that probably they don't want passed until after the election, such as the nature positive. So from an Australian Industry Group point of view.
By the way, what's the predictions for the economy? Is it going to continue to improve? Because that's a key factor in elections, isn't it?
That's right. So I think the government will be hoping for a interest rate decrease before they go into the election.
Yeah, that'd be happy for that. Yeah.
I'm not sure they're going to get that because the inflation and this Black Friday sales bonanza or buying bonanza probably won't help. I think that will make the economy look a bit too hard.
One person's bonanza is another person's frenzy, by the way. Yeah.
So from an AR Group point of view, because we are non-partisan, as soon as the election is called, we stop talking. Or we can talk about overseas events, but not, about policies here in Australia. We are working on our pre-election statements and we'll release those end of January. And so during the election, if we're asked about anything, we just point to those and say that's our answer.
Yeah, because we are non-political. I guess people sometimes don't understand that that's actually 100% true, And I know that because we have people from both sides talking to us. What about AUKUS? We should, just wrap up AUKUS for the year, and also, for that matter, the Quad. Are those things staying in place? Are they strong? What are the defence people telling you?
So I think we're at a point of AUKUS now where everyone is waiting to see, what's really going to happen. Australia, it's basically a big free trade agreement, essentially. Yeah, we've made the changes to our legislation on a number of things, ITAR. So to comply with ITAR, actually we'll go beyond ITAR for our export controls, the SAMS Act, which we've spoken about throughout the year. And now everyone's just waiting to see if there's any money anywhere for anything. And yes, we'll wait and see. But I think in terms of the Quad, there were some reports over
so the Quad is the US, Japan, India, and us, is that
That's right. Yep. And what was going to say, and on Japan, there were some reports on the weekend that we're talking to Japan, both Japan and Germany, about buying some frigates from them. And so I think the Japan is slightly on, according to the reports, slightly on edge at the moment.
Yeah, there's challenges everywhere, isn't there? All right, let's move on to Future Made in Australia. We've talked a lot about Future Made in Australia. I think that was one of the acts that got passed in the last day of Parliament.
Yep.
Where did it land in the end? We've talked about it a lot, so just...
So it was divided up into a number of different things, including the framework, which talked about the guarantee of origin and a few other things. But the bit that I don't think actually passed, or I couldn't see that it passed, was the production credits bit, which is the money.
Which is the bit that the businesses want to hear about. Yeah,
that's it. Yeah. That's it. It's interesting, talking to members about Future Made in Australia, there's still a lot of confusion, and people seem to think it's about that, a Future Made in Australia, about all sorts of things, but it is really narrow around hydrogen, around, batteries, solar panels.
Well, like we said, anything called Made in Australia has got historical understanding attached to it. To call it Future Made in Australia and have it as a completely different thing is there's a little bit of disingenuous commentary there. Yeah.
But I mean, and just on Future Made, it's all around hydrogen and lithium, all sorts of things, some critical minerals. Speaking to one of our members who are a heavy energy user, they said the last thing we need is hydrogen. What we actually want is a biomethane market to be opened up, which is not really getting much much attention at all. So I think we've all drunk the Kool-Aid on hydrogen.
Why is that? Why is it? To me, it seems like a really good energy source, but that's just me. I don't know.
Yeah, it is interesting because obviously we produce a lot of sugar, which is one of the ingredients, and a lot of countries around the world use sugar. I don't know whether we think using arable land, agricultural products for fuel is sensible. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. They call, up in the sugarcane area, they call sugarcane poverty grass because they can't just get enough money per acre. But maybe that might change. All right, let's moving on. We've covered so much this year. It's been fascinating. What about cyber security? That's been a big topic. Where have we finished the year and what's it looking like going forward?
Yes, so that legislation was passed as well, and that was, as we've talked about, getting standards around IoT-enabled or internet-connected devices, particularly for consumers in the household, so your washing machine, your TV, dishwasher, all that kind of stuff. You want to make sure that it's got good cybersecurity around it so that, nefarious actors can't just turn all your devices on remotely and blow your power system. So there's that. There's, within cybersecurity, there's also the ransomware reporting, which, governments like to think that reporting is not regulation, but it's still onerous. But anyway, so this, if you are subject to a ransomware attack, and if you're a company of a certain size, then you'll have to report on that to the government, whether or not you've paid the ransom or not, because they want to start to get an understanding of the scale of the problem. And There's also some regulation around a review board, looking at cyber incidences to see what the country can learn from it, which could be useful, as long as but we were very strong that it couldn't be another name and shame opportunity. And finally, if you are under a cyber attack, that the government will very helpfully come in and help you, which we always think that help's only welcome when it's wanted. The challenge with that, of course, some companies, very big and sophisticated, you might say, well, how did they get cyber attacked? These things happen. May not actually want government in. By the time you train someone in, an outsider onto your systems, time is lost and time is of the essence. But also, as I understand, talking to various members who have had a cyber attack, you never know the first day just how big it is. So you don't know if it's a major incident which would warrant reporting, because you don't know, is this just, someone's hacked the printer, or is this a company-wide attack? And often it's just discovery after discovery. And
that's the lesson for the last few years. We had bushfires around, and next thing you know, those bushfires were everywhere and lasted 6 months. COVID started, and we thought it was another 6-month incident, and it lasted 2 years. You never know what's coming across your desk. It's this thing, and then next thing it becomes a major cyber attack or whatever. Well, wonder what's next year. This is our last one for the year. It's always hard to answer this question when you're up to your elbows in the alligator pit. But what was the good part for this year for you? What do you feel most comfortable about in your achievements, or in what happened in industry policy and development?
Well, I think we have got quite a few wins. I mean, on privacy, we managed to keep SMEs out of the Privacy Act, which is great. So we'll keep that fired up. Some little things that we've managed to change. So the payment times, big companies paying SMEs across the board was meant to be 30 days, and then you're shamed if you're not. We managed to change that legislation so that it's industry specific. So if in your industry payment terms it's 3 months, and that's what you'd be judged against. So there's that. I don't know, so much, James. We've got the R&D review coming up. So, I mean, that's exciting. So there's a few things that we've been calling for that, all the work on AI, I mean, as per the report from members, they want some regulation. So we're working to try to make sure that regulation is not too crazy. But, hopefully with the work that we're doing with the National AI Centre, running these workshops around the country, we're lifting the use of AI across industry, across our members.
There's so much, isn't there? I think if we've learned anything from listening to you in these podcasts this year, is that industry policy and industry development is incremental. It's these small steps, these sometimes micro steps, but each one adds towards some sort of big gain in the end. So
that's
it's very
right.
hard.
So that's why I tell the team that we are water dripping on a rock. Sometimes we see the water break. Sometimes we see the rock break. And sometimes we don't.
Sometimes you just got to keep dripping. Yes.
But actually, one good example, because I was telling the team, they said, yeah, but it did break, because look at this. So we did some submissions around utilisation of FTAs. Right. And, we've been calling for this for a long time, but we want the trusted advisor model that the US has for FTA negotiations. So you get a security clearance, you get access to all the materials, and you can actually make a real contribution to the negotiations of FTAs. During the Trans-Pacific Partnership FTA, something like 68 Americans had access to that text. No Australian did. Anyway, so I've been saying that for years, and every submission, finally this year, it was accepted by the committee, and I spoke to the legislation. They were hoping legislation to be in this year, but it's a very busy year, so hopefully it'll be next year. But it just shows you just got to keep fighting, keep chipping away, and eventually things happen.
Well, Louise McGrath, the biggest trip of all, congratulations on a good year. Thanks for a monthly wonderful chat, and all the best for Christmas.
Thanks very much, James. You have a good Christmas too.
And that's it for this episode and this year of DBrief. Thank you for joining us. If you enjoy the show, remember to like and subscribe, and please tell others about the show. Feel encouraged to view our posts on LinkedIn. Go to my page or Louise's or Australian Industry Group, and please share the post about the show to your connections and network. And we'll talk to you next year.